the shadow frequency, where the veil between this world and the next grows thin, and the things that whisper in the dark are given voice. From the cryptic candlelit studios, deep in the Indiana forests, your host, Matt Wilson, and his spectral producer, Juniper Ravenwood, unearth the forbidden, the forgotten, and the fearsome. So, still your heart, dim the light, and listen closely. For once you tune into the shadow frequency, you may never tune out.
Tonight, we're opening a file that feels older than paper. This is one of those names we brushed past early on, back when the cabinet still creaked a little less and the folders didn't seem to breathe when you pulled them open. But some cases deserve a second look. Some cases wait, and Saint-Germain is absolutely one of them. Because this one is not just a ghost story, not just a court rumor, not just another strange aristocrat with expensive taste and a gift for performance. This is the story of a real man who moved through 18th century Europe, leaving behind music, chemistry, diplomacy, whispers, contradictions, and one very stubborn legend, that he beat age itself. A count with no confirmed origin, a gentleman who seemed to know everyone, a man tied to alchemy, jewels, secret missions, and stories that insisted he never seemed to get older. Historically, he was real. The immortal part is the legend that grew around him. So I want to know what you two think. Matt, Chris, when a man turns up in royal courts speaking languages, playing the violin, talking chemistry, and dropping hints that he knows a little too much about life and death, what does that sound like to you?
It sounds, June, like exactly the sort of bloke you'd invite in for one glass of wine and then spend the next 40 years wondering whether you just had a chat with a genius, a fraud, or something far stranger than either. And every eccentricity turns into a sign of hidden knowledge, which is a very dangerous thing to let loose among bored aristocrats.
That is very much the problem, yes.
And it also sounds like somebody who knew how to weaponize mystery, which honestly is part of what makes him so compelling. You can tell this story as history, as occult lore, as court intrigue, or as a straight-up immortality legend, and somehow it still works.
Exactly, because the deeper you go, the more slippery he gets.
And that means it's time to go back into the cabinet.
Then let's do it. Matt, take it away.
You are tuned to the shadow frequency, where every whisper tells a story from beyond the veil. Hosted by Matt Wilson, produced by Juniper Ravenwood, with Chris Beach. The darkness continues.
First off, thank you to Juniper for digging into the file cabinet and pulling this one back out, because Saint-Germain is one of those names that hangs around the edges of the paranormal, whether you want it to or not. You start in history, and before long you're in a place that feels like candle smoke and coded letters. The real Count of Saint-Germain appears in the 18th century as a documented figure of uncertain origin. Nobody could pin down exactly where he came from. Britannica's summary is blunt about it. His real name, parentage, and birthplace were never firmly established. But what people did agree on was that he was brilliant company. He knew languages, played the violin, composed music, spoke with authority on history, and built much of his reputation on chemistry. That alone would have made him memorable. What made him dangerous to the imagination was everything else. Because Saint-Germain did not present himself like an ordinary court hanger-on. He moved like a man who expected doors to open. He was in London. He was later at the French court. Louis XV used him on secret missions. Horace Walpole wrote about him being arrested in London during the Jacobite scare and then released. That means this is not just folklore wandering around without footprints. There are footprints. There are letters. There are names. There are records. And once you know that, the whole story gets better, not weaker, because now you're dealing with a real human being who somehow generated a legend big enough to outlive his own century. And I've got something from the file right here tonight, a printed copy of the Walpole letter. Not the original, obviously, but a clean transcript of it. And what I love about it is the tone. Walpole doesn't describe some glowing wizard drifting down a staircase. He describes an odd, slippery, unsettling man who used a title that may not have been his real name, whose identity seemed to change depending on who was talking about him, and who could sing, play violin, and carry himself like a person with serious means. That's what gives the Saint-Germain legend its teeth. It starts with witnesses who sound half amused and half unnerved. Not because they saw a miracle happen in front of them, but because they met someone who seemed built out of cultivated impossibility. Then you get to the stories that made him unforgettable. Casanova, who knew his share of performers and pretenders, described Saint-Germain as a man who claimed astonishing things very casually. 300 years old. Possessor of the universal medicine. Mastery over nature. The ability to melt diamonds and recombine smaller stones into larger, flawless ones. Casanova did not exactly hand him sainthood, but he also did not shrug him off. He called him astonishing, and that is the word that keeps coming back. Astonishing. Not because everyone believed him, but because he kept saying impossible things with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent a long time practicing the effect. And then there's one detail that always gets under people's skin. Saint-Germain was said to eat almost nothing in company. Casanova remembered that too. He would dine with society and barely touch food, saying he sustained himself by special means known only to him. Now look, if you're trying to build the atmosphere around a man already rumored to know alchemy, secret chemistry, and hidden laws of the body, that is exactly the kind of detail that catches fire. One strange habit becomes a sign. One sign becomes a pattern. And suddenly you are no longer looking at a gifted court adventurer. You are looking at somebody people begin to suspect has found a way to step slightly outside the normal machinery of human life. Voltaire, with that sharp little edge of his, helped lock the image in place by treating Saint-Germain as this Wonder Man figure, this man people talked about as though he knew everything and never died. Even if the line was sarcastic, that sarcasm did not kill the legend. It fed it. Because once that kind of description gets attached to a man already wrapped in ambiguity, it becomes almost impossible to separate the historical figure from the supernatural silhouette forming behind him. And I think that's the point where the first layer of the haunting begins. Not a ghost haunting a house, but a myth haunting a life. Saint-Germain understood presentation. He understood what not to say. He understood the power of uncertain origins, selective revelation, rare skills, polished manners, and just enough impossible talk to leave aristocrats whispering after he'd gone. He didn't need everyone to believe him. He only needed people to wonder. Wonder lasts longer. Wonder spreads. So if you're sitting in a Paris salon in the glow of candlelight and this man in perfect clothes is discussing music, chemistry, diplomacy, old courts, gemstones, and hidden laws of matter like he's reading from notes no one else can see, tell me you wouldn't feel it too. That first cold little suggestion that maybe this Count isn't merely educated. Maybe he's preserved. Maybe the rumors aren't rumors. Maybe the real secret of alchemy was never gold at all. Maybe it was time. And once that idea gets into a room, it does not leave quietly.
No, because then every gesture starts to look like evidence.
Right. Then it's not just a man in the room anymore. It's a theory in a velvet coat. And every time he smiles, people start filling in the gaps with immortality. And once people start treating ordinary details like proof, the man stops being a person and becomes a legend with a pulse. That's when Saint-Germain quits walking through history and starts haunting it.
It is. And in the second half, that's where we go next. Death. The records that say he died, and the stories that insist he kept walking anyway. Juniper, over to you.
far, we've got a courtly phantom with a violin, a chemistry set, and a reputation that sounds like it was stitched together by candlelight and gossip. I'm guessing a lot of you are already asking the same question we are. Was Saint-Germain just the finest self-invented mystery of his age? Or did he really brush up against something forbidden? Chris, come on in.
Thanks, June. And yeah, this one's right up my alley. Because Saint-Germain has that very specific sort of elegance that makes a case more unsettling, not less. He doesn't stomp in like a monster story. He just appears, says things no one can explain, and leaves everybody a bit rattled. And while you're rattled, do us a favor, hit like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, because that really does help the algorithms find more people who enjoy this strange little corner of the world. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, and all the major podcast directories. And head over to shadowfrequencypodcast.com for every episode, the companion blog, merch, show notes, and links to all the platforms. You can also support the show by buying us a coffee on the website, and if you want to reach out, send an email or a voice message through the site, and it might end up on a future episode. Alright, send something weird through the machine.
All right, thanks, Chris. Time to fire up the spectral cosmic message materializer. Let's flip the switches. There we go. The coils are humming, the static is curling, and something thin and papery is drifting out of the ether like it got lost between dimensions.
Message retrieved.
Let's catch
from
this little
the
scrap
void.
before it disappears under the cabinet and see what our listeners sent in. All right, tonight's note comes from John in Georgia. Says, hey, Matt, Juniper, and Chris. I usually listen in the evenings out on my screen back porch after work. Especially this time of year when April starts warming up down here and the rain's rolling through, I've got the show on Spotify while the frogs are going and the whole yard sounds a little haunted already, which honestly makes your episodes hit even harder. I'm especially into hauntings, occult history, and time slip stories. Anything where it feels like the world got thin for a minute and somebody saw too much. Just wanted to say I appreciate the atmosphere you all create has become part of my routine. Keep the lantern lit. John from Georgia. I like that one a lot. Screen porch, spring rain, frogs going, shadow frequency in the background. That is a mood. And John, thank you for listening. You can always email us at shadowpodcast@protonmail.com. Okay, now let's get back over to Chris for a bit of Bigfoot news.
Thanks, June. Got a little bit of recent Bigfoot news here. A newly logged report with the BFRO says a college professor and his wife had a strange encounter earlier this month at the Audubon Wetlands Preserve, just outside Ashland, Ohio. They reportedly heard 2 or 3 loud wood knocks coming from the trees ahead, then later found several large barefoot tracks in a muddy section of the preserve, said to be around 14 to 16 inches long. Investigators note the area sits very close to an earlier Ashland sighting from 2021, with the 2 locations connected by natural wildlife corridors along the Jerome Fork River. All right then, back into the fog. Juniper?
Thanks, Chris, and honestly, there is just something about wood knocks and tracks in wet ground that will always get under my skin a little bit. Even when it's brief, even when it's daylight, it still leaves that little question hanging there. But tonight, we're stepping away from the marshes and into candlelight, court gossip, and one of history's strangest men. So, Matt, let's get back to Saint-Germain.
You are tuned to the shadow frequency, where every whisper tells a story from beyond the veil. The darkness continues.
Thanks, Juniper. And John, that's exactly the right setting for this one, because if there was ever a story built for damp air and uneasy thoughts, it's Saint-Germain After Dark. And pretty interesting on that Bigfoot story there, Chris. I'll have to check that out. All right, well, we left off with the living legend, the man of languages, music, chemistry, court access, and impossible hints. But here's where the case changes shape. History does eventually try to close the file. Britannica places his probable death on February 27, 1784. So the official version is not that he drifted in the mist. It is that he died as men do, in a real place, on a real date, after years of moving between courts and patrons. And I've got the second item from the file right here. It's a photocopied note on the church record and later reporting tied to his burial. This is the kind of paper that always changes the temperature in a story, because you can feel history trying to pin a legend to the board. Name, date, church register, burial, done. End of matter. Except with Saint-Germain, end of matter never seemed to work. Even secondary historical summaries point to that 1784 death record, while also noting that sightings and claims did not stop there. In fact, they almost seem to intensify, because once you give a legend a death date, every later appearance becomes more powerful. That's where the posthumous Saint-Germain really takes over. Britannica notes that he was said to have been seen in Paris in 1789 during the opening violence of the French Revolution. Other later memoir traditions, especially the material linked to the Comtesse de Mar, go even further and place him in scenes of warning and prophecy around Marie Antoinette and the collapse of the old order. Now, to be careful for one moment, and this is the one skeptical note I think the story deserves, those Revolutionary era sightings come to us through later memoir literature, not through some ironclad police blotter stamped and filed on the day it happened. So no, we cannot prove that Saint-Germain stood in Paris after 1784 and calmly predicted doom. But the fact that this is how people chose to remember him matters a great deal. It means he had already crossed from strange man into mythic witness. And honestly, that may be where the paranormal charge of this case really lives, because even the skeptical angle doesn't drain it, it almost strengthens it. Say Saint-Germain was a supreme self-inventor, a brilliant manipulator of image, information, and elite psychology. Fine. Then explain why he lingered so powerfully after his reported death that later generations kept placing him at the hinge points of history. Why him? Why not a dozen other polished frauds of the century? Why does his name keep coming back whenever people start talking about hidden adepts, forbidden chemistry, spiritual transformation, and bodies untouched by ordinary decay? By the 20th century, the metamorphosis is complete. Saint-Germain is no longer just an 18th century adventurer with strange habits and a talent for mystique. In the theosophical and I Am orbit, he becomes an ascended master. Britannica's history of the I Am movement says Guy Ballard claimed that in 1930 on Mount Shasta, he was contacted by Saint-Germain, one of the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood. Ballard then built an entire religious movement around messages, teaching, and a cosmic Saint-Germain who had moved far beyond the boundaries of ordinary biography. That is an astonishing second life for a man who may have already spent his first life blurring the line between chemistry and sorcery. So think about the arc of it. He begins as a documented but unidentified man of learning. He becomes a court mystery. He gathers rumors of age, elixirs, jewels, transmutation, and impossible knowledge. He dies, apparently. Then he reappears in whispers, in revolutionary memory, in occult tradition, in spiritual systems that no longer treat him as merely historical at all. That is not a normal afterlife for a historical figure. That is a haunting, not necessarily by a ghost, but by a persona so perfectly calibrated that it achieves something close to immortality whether the body did or not. And here's the thing I can't shake. Real or not, literal or symbolic, Saint-Germain is attached again and again to the same core temptation, that somewhere there exists a hidden law by which decay can be resisted, maybe through chemistry, maybe through initiation, maybe through spiritual refinement, maybe through some synthesis of all three. He sits right on that pressure point where Enlightenment science, court politics, Rosicrucian rumor, and occult hunger all overlap. That's why he never stays buried in one category. He is too historical for pure fantasy and too strange for plain history. So did he truly discover eternal life? History cannot give us that. Legend absolutely insists on it. And the older I get, the more I think Saint-Germain may have solved the problem in a different way. Maybe he did not preserve the flesh. Maybe he preserved the self. Maybe he learned how to enter memory so effectively with such polish and such mystery that long after the grave record was written, people kept opening doors for him anyway. That, to me, is the eerie final turn. A man does not have to be physically immortal to become impossible to kill. He just has to become the kind of story history can never fully close. And somewhere in some quiet room, I swear he's still smiling at that.
Because for all the talk of elixirs and alchemy, that may be the cleverest trick of all, leaving behind a legend that behaves like a living thing.
Yeah, and I don't like how much that feels true.
Neither do I, but that's Saint-Germain. The file ends, and somehow, the case doesn't.
Tonight, we visited one of those names that never quite stays in the past, Saint-Germain, the Count who moved through Europe like a rumor in human form, and left behind a legend of alchemy, hidden knowledge, and maybe even immortality. Thanks for joining us down here in the cabinet again tonight. If you want to reach out, you can email us at shadowpodcast@protonmail.com. And don't forget about our website, shadowfrequencypodcast.com, where you can find all the episodes, merchandise, the blog, show notes, and much more. Don't forget to follow along also on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Rumble, and make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen. It really helps. You guys want to say goodnight?
Good night, everybody. And if a man in perfect clothes starts telling you he remembers quartz that should be dust by now, maybe don't ask his age.
Good night, all. Mind who you let into the salon.
And until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows and your signal tuned to the strange.
This episode was conjured with a solemn vow to explore the unexplained while remaining bound to the truths that have been unearthed. All interpretations are speculative and offered only for your enlightenment and your entertainment.